On this episode of the Midwives Cauldron, it's just me and Rachel hanging out and stirring the pot discussing vaginal examinations. We take a step back in history to look at how midwives originally used vaginal examination during labour and for what purpose. We look at current guidelines. Rachel goes on her classic history trail for us and has found out the original research that guidelines are based on. We talk about said research, timelines of labour, the risks of vaginal examinations, language midwives could use to discuss vaginal examinations in labour, the importance of talking about vaginal examinations during the antenatal phase, and how mainstream media influences us into thinking that vaginal examinations are actually an important part of our labour. We look at how medical birth needs a different assessment from physiological birth, and I ask whether there should ever be a timeline on labour, and if so, for how long? And we question how students can actually learn the skill of vaginal examinations if we shouldn't be doing as many as we are. And lastly, Rachel teaches me the word fertile. All of this and much, much more on this episode of the Midwives Cauldron. So get the keys in the engine, baby in the sling, and the dog on the leash, as you're in for a great treat. I'm Katie James, and this is the Midwives Cauldron podcast. Each episode, I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Dr. Rachel Reed. Listen in as we hubble, bubble, toil and trouble our way through aspects of womanhood, midwifery, birth and lactation. So go on, subscribe now, and hear us on your favourite podcast host. But just a sec, before we start on this epic episode, if you love the show and want more from Rachel and me, then head on over to our website and check out all the courses, books, collectives a go-go. You'll find all the details and occasional discount deals on the old Instagram at the Midwives Cauldron, or, of course, in the show notes below. And if you really, really love the show, please consider two things: a single or a monthly donation over on Patreon, or even buy me a coffee. And remember, that review you leave on your podcast host really makes a difference in who listens in. Thank you for your support. We just love having you bubbling away with us.
I've got...
What? Show me condoms. What are you doing now? Are you just branching out? Branching out into sex education.
They're going to be
banana.
a prop for my lesson. I don't know how it's going to work. We'll see.
Right.
I need an amniotic sac. Thinking I can make one.
Can you not just blow up the condom?
Well, I'm going to put water in it.
Oh yeah, great. It's brills. Lovely. Oh, you got two of them. Oh, I get it. That's awesome.
I've got two because I asked my daughter to bring one. She brought two because she knows I'll probably break one while I'm
I thought you were just going to have the chorion and amnion. Then you've got two.
No, because then I'd have to colour them in. Oh, can you imagine? Otherwise, you wouldn't.
You could just use like food dye with the water.
Oh my God, no.
In one on the inside.
I just need a sack.
Not the outside.
I just need a sack of water to squeeze.
Right. I was just thinking you could burst one bit and
no.
But then you'd have to put them together, put your hand in the condom, and then like put the other one over the top, like two pairs of socks, and then blow them up. Oh, you'd be covered in all that smell.
Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about today.
Brilliant. Well, I'm excited for what you're talking about today. I love how you're looking at your notes now, like, what am I talking about today?
Because it's changed. Because I was talking about...
I know.
And I went, oh.
I know. And then I woke up this morning and went, okie dokie, we have a different topic. That's all right.
Well,
Thanks
just
for the
thought,
questions.
Well, I'm busy writing something with something completely different. And I'm not very good at switching
Yeah.
from one thing to the other. So we'll see how I do with this. I thought it would be easier to switch into this than into the other one, which we might do another time. So I'll not say what it is to build suspense.
I'll leave it at that. I need like side effects. Side effects? No, sound effects. I'm not sure what the side effects are from listening to this. Hopefully, just laughter and empowerment and strength.
You have to have warnings. Side effects.
Yeah, warning label. This could cause headaches, dizziness, diarrhea.
Please do not listen while operating dangerous machinery.
I think that should be a warning anyway, to be honest. Oh, right. So, Rachel, I'm so excited that today, and I've just been waiting for this for so long. I mean, actually, I have, to be honest. We're talking about VEs and assessing labour progress. Amazing.
Yes, and
we
have kind of talked about it before, which is why I was going, I'm not sure, but we haven't really focused in on vaginal examinations.
And I get a lot of questions asking, which podcast specifically talks about this, and I have to answer, well, it's like a smattering throughout a lot of podcasts. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this, and you have to listen to them all, but also I can say there is this one. Go and listen to. I mean, you should be listening to all our podcasts, just saying, everybody. And why not? And if you haven't, go back catalogue. But here today is a little super song of vaginal examinations.
A super song.
But you should put those words together.
Oh,
maybe you should start talking and I should just shut up.
Right. Well, the sound's a little bit off this end, so you'll have to edit that and do the.
Oh, brilliant! That's brilliant. So can I just start and ask you a question?
Yes, go for it.
So, what's going on today is that VEs, vaginal examinations, are a routine element of midwifery practice. But have they always been?
Well, so now you're right. Now it's a very, very important skill that lots of student midwives freak out about. And, that's how they get assessed and they're expected to do them. And it's, stressful, as having to learn how to do them, and everything just feels like mush for a few years. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's ahead. And even then, there's a lot of times you get caught out. When you think, you're not sure. Anyway, so yes, it is and
you feel really embarrassed as well, like when you're, in quotes, wrong.
Yes. Yeah, if you ever are wrong. And so, yes, it is.
Exactly.
It is still a skill, and it has always been a midwifery skill. But the difference is it hasn't always been to assess progress. So midwives have always had the skill and have done vaginal examinations. But until fairly recently, it's been in order to assess what they think may be a complication. So, thinking that this labor pattern's not normal, or, I'm a bit worried about something about this labor. And then they would use a vaginal examination as part of the assessment to get a better idea of the position of the baby, mostly, not the cervix, but, is this baby coming down brow first? That kind of thing. So that's how
it turned.
Yeah. That's how it used to be used, was let's see if I can really remember looking after a woman who was having a third baby. It wasn't her first. And she was, pushing, and she hadn't been pushing for long, but it just felt wrong. And she said, this baby's not moving. And we did a vaginal examination, and it was a brow. It was the baby's forehead coming down. So that's how vaginal examination used to be used until fairly recently. And there was even... And again, this is difficult because the written word around midwifery practice isn't until fairly recently after medicalization, because midwifery was an oral tradition that was passed down. So we're having to kind of look back in history and pick up little bits that may have been written. And if we look back, then there were certainly warnings about doing too many vaginal examinations, all the way through history until the 16th, 17th century. And then we see a shift once we move into that. Yeah. So midwives in the 60s.
Like warnings to say you shouldn't be doing this, like only use this if you're noticing a problem, or you need to blah, 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 XYZ.
Yes. So, we had European midwives saying, don't do too much vaginal meddling, that it's best to wait and see what happens. Wow. And, even the early 1900s, the midwifery textbooks recommended only carrying out a VE if labor had become unusually long. So they were saying, and if a labor had gone on for 24 hours, then maybe a vaginal examination should be done. So that was the early 1900s.
Oh my God, compared to what we have now.
And can you guess why? Can you guess why it all shifted?
I'm going to say patriarchy and medicalization, and to make sure that us women were doing what we were told to keep us in our place.
This man, don't know whether you can see that.
Oh, wait. Oh, Emanuel A. Friedman.
Yes.
Is that right? Because you're...
Emanuel A. Friedman in the 1950s, which we have talked about before, because this was the guy who created graphs. When I was researching this, when I was creating a lesson about this, I came across this book popped up on eBay from America. Somebody who just sells secondhand books was selling Labor, Clinical Evaluation and Management, second edition. Because when I do research, I try and find the original source, and it's really difficult with old texts. And Emanuel Friedman, I have got his journal articles, but I wanted to see what he was writing in textbooks. So I got this, and it's just fascinating. I'm actually going to put some pictures up. It's all graphs, and, the body is a machine, which was, as we've talked about before, influential in the development of the medical understanding of birth as a machine and a process where the cervix kind of just opens in nice, neat circles, 1 centimeter an hour, and you can plot it on a graph.
Of course.
So that's
absolutely. We should all be plotted on a graph.
Absolutely.
Every daily activity that women do, really.
And there was
actually in our place.
We actually weren't doing vaginal examinations all of the time. It was also rectal examinations. So in a lot of places, they would assess the cervix through the rectum. Because apparently you can feel the rectum. I can't say I've ever tried, but apparently you can.
I mean, I can remember being taught that had occurred, and that was a recent thing that used to happen. And thankfully in our training, we were not made to do that.
No, we were just made to do vaginal examinations. But but really, Friedman was a reflection of the time. So, we can blame him, but he's actually just writing in the culture that was happening at that time. And that's why we now have vaginal examinations as part of modern midwifery practice routinely in order to assess labor, rather than, as there had been, in order to determine if there was a complication and help to assess what was happening in a complication. Now we had it routinely for all labors to assess progress. And we have already talked on podcasts, so I'm not going to go full on into that, because people can go back and listen to our podcast with Claire Davison about, there is no evidence that doing a vaginal examination assesses progress. And yet that's what we are doing.
Quite a lot of. What's the research supporting the use of VEs right now? Is there any, or is this going to be like fetal monitoring where I get really annoyed and you tell me the same thing?
I think most of midwifery
do I need to prepare myself?
Fetal monitoring, where you just actually end up more confused by the time you've looked at everything than you were if you just followed the flow chart. Following flow charts is easy. Once you start questioning what's happening, it does your head in. So VEs is like that. Since the 1950s and then the 70s, which is when that book was published, and Friedman's work ended up in hospitals all across the world by the 1990s. Since then, there has been a whole load of research, and we've covered some of it when we've talked to Dr. Claire Davison about research progress, etc. So I'm just going to give you a summary rather than reading through the research, because
thank you.
There's there is Cochrane reviews, so there is enough to do Cochrane reviews, but essentially this is my synopsis of the research about doing vaginal examinations to assess labor progress. Okay, current understandings of labor progress patterns are incorrect. That's what the evidence says. There is
Right.
no evidence that vaginal examinations can accurately assess labor progress or improve outcomes. And many women experience vaginal examinations negatively, and some find them traumatizing. That's a summary of the research. So,
Wow.
no, there isn't good research to support doing it. But it was brought in, just like everything else, without the evidence. It was brought in based on a very small, crappy bit of research and evidence from Friedman that created the partogram. Everyone just started doing it. And now we're desperately trying to get research to show it's all right not to do the thing, which is just how everything seems to work. And even the research that's looking at vaginal examinations is still done in the same paradigm and the same, and the outcomes or the recommendations are still in the same paradigm. So, for example, you could probably remember this because it was all over the news when research found that women's cervixes don't open the way that Friedman said they do, and the recommendation and that they actually do it a lot slower until kind of 6 centimeters, in which case things tend to speed up. That's a synopsis. So let's just start the clock at 6 centimeters. That was the recommendation. Not, okay, so it doesn't work, let's get rid of it. It was just, let's shift the parameters, even though they're still parameters. So even though we're doing more research, we're still coming out with the same answers because the research is asking questions that are still coming out of the same paradigm. The whole thing is tainted.
And it's geared up to keep following this kind of partogram, as in charting and having these expectations and limitations on women's bodies, rather than looking at a whole cohort and saying, wow, look at the vast variety of what primigravida women do, women who've had 2 babies, maybe women who've had 3 babies, and let's look at this as a whole rather than putting them into boxes and going, actually, these are our research parameters, and then ends up with a similar outcome because we're looking at it through that lens.
Yeah, and the whole lens that the cervix is the determining factor of progress, when it's not. It's one small thing. And as we've said before, whether or not it opens is not just about where the labor progress is, it's the position of the baby, it's all kinds of, whether the woman's had babies before. Individual women have individual patterns of their cervix opening, just like they do with menstruating and other bodily processes. We're all just a bit different, and that's how our bodies labor. And when it comes to labor progress, it's more about the transformation of the uterus. It kind of builds this fundus, and as part of building the fundus, the cervix gets stretched out of the way and sometimes held out of the way if the baby's head's holding it out of the way. So long story short, a vaginal examination cannot tell us about the progress of a labor. And yet this is what we carry on doing.
But VEs are entrenched, and they are in every single guideline and hospital policy. So as a midwife, you are obliged or feel obliged to do them. And it's a really tricky place to be because you feel like you're completely going against, if it's a policy, guidelines one thing, but if it's a policy, you feel so stuck. And it's a really it feels like it could be a tricky path to run, not only because it's in writing, it's what all your colleagues do, but going against that can feel really scary because you're not at that point where you're possibly trusting your instincts and the other ways of assessing progress.
Yes, you're right. And that's what a lot of midwives say to me. So as a midwife, you have an obligation to, if you're employed by an employer, to follow their guidelines and their policies. There is no guideline that says do a vaginal examination every 4 hours, full stop. You offer a vaginal examination. They don't use the word offer. So yes, you will, if you are working in a facility that's part of the expected practice of you could choose not to do it because not evidence-based, but good luck to you, and you'll be fighting. Sometimes you're up for a fight, sometimes you're not. Or you can actually, you have to get consent to do it, so you can share the information with the women, And yeah, most women will say do it, even with adequate information, because it's culturally normal for women to have that as well, and for them to think that's progress, labor progress. But if we look at guidelines, they're not evidence-based. And let me just walk you through, because I did, that thing that Sarah and I do when we're bored, because we're
love it. We're all grateful that you do this. And you go back and you're like, well, that's not evidence. Let's go further back. That's not evidence.
Well, it's a bit sad. But anyway, I got the Queensland Health Normal Birth Guidelines because they're my local guidelines. So everyone can play along at home. Go and get your local guidelines. Queensland Health Normal.
Oh, I can't wait for this game. Brilliant. Someone from Switzerland, can you just get in the guidelines for me?
So the normal birth guidelines for Queensland are actually quite good in that they're pretty much evidence-based, like a lot of guidelines on. But this is what the guidelines.
Are we saying evidence-based with the quote marks there, as in the evidence that you just gave them?
The Queensland Health Normal Birth Guidelines are actually pretty good. And actually, a lot of guidelines, if you read them, the problem is that in clinical areas, often people don't read the guidelines and it becomes just hearsay. So it's like, oh, the guidelines say blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, hang on, read the guidelines, because that's not what it actually says. But let's look at the vaginal examination, because I think most guidelines drop the ball when it comes to vaginal examination. So in the Queensland Health Normal Birth Guidelines, it says that where membranes are intact, there is no evidence to support or reject the use of routine VEs in labour to improve outcomes for women and babies. Correct?
Brilliant.
Yeah. So then it says, aim to keep the number of VEs to a minimum. To assist in decision-making, recommend VE, right, here we go, within 4 hours of presentation. So they've just gone against what they've just said. Offer every 4 hours in active labour, or if clinical concerns are identified. So they've actually made an evidence-based statement and then made an indication for doing it that is against the statement. So let's have a look at the reference that they use for offering every 4 hours. Reference number 40, which is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. That's, another
the
guideline.
UK. Let's fly over.
So we're going to fly over to the UK and we're going to look at their guideline. So in their guideline, this is what they say. Offer a vaginal examination 4 hourly, or if there is a concern about progress or in response to the woman's wishes. And that was 2007, but in the updated guideline, they haven't changed that. So the 2017 guideline says exactly the same thing. And the citation they gave for that, so now we're going to travel off to find out what they're citing, is a research that was done in 1996 that was called, Can the frequency of vaginal examinations influence the duration of labour? A prospective randomized study.
Right.
So this was a study. So this study is being used to recommend 4 hourly VEs. This study was basically looking at 109 nulliparous patients. So that's women having their first baby in spontaneous labour after 37 weeks. And they were randomly allocated to either have 2 hourly VEs or 4 hourly VEs. And there was no difference in the duration of their labours.
But that's not telling us anything. And also it hasn't looked at the alternative of not doing a 4 hourly or a 2 hourly VE. And did it look at the women's psychological well-being of what they felt? No.
So the results, they say the results of the study indicate that as far as duration of labour is concerned, there's no added value of adding in another VE to do it every 2 hourly. So that is the research.
Wow, great.
To support today's recommendation for 4 hourly VEs and guidelines.
Of 4 hourly.
Yeah.
But that isn't a recommendation of 4 hourly. That's not, it's just that's just looking at the difference between 4 hourly and 2 hourly, and whether doing it even more frequently. Yeah. We didn't have a control.
And it's only on the duration of labour. So you're right, not about outcomes or whether women liked it or not liked it or experience of labour so that's my little trail through that research. So
and that's it. That was it. That was that piece of research. Nothing else.
No. Now guidelines are made by working parties. Okay. Now I thought you might be interested in my input to that guideline review.
Of course. Absolutely.
Because another good waste of your time is being on a working party and responding to the guidelines. Now, I was saying that, and I shouldn't say that. It's not a waste of time because you do change things. So I have seen Queensland Health Guideline evolve and shift according to people's responses to it. So it does change things. However, just to make the point that, remember, the highest evidence is, meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, right? Which we don't have to support that. So this was my response to those guidelines when I was talking about like assessing labor progress. So in the latent first stage, because they use the first stage thing, my response to it was that it would be nice to include the evidence re women's experiences of early labor and issues re-accessing their intended birthing place. It is important for midwives to understand their role as gatekeepers and ensure they are providing woman-centered care at this time. Right? The response from so they have to give a table of everybody's comments and their response to the comments. The response to that comment. Thank you for your feedback. Out of scope.
What?
So then
that was it.
So
wait, hold on.
So the experience of women.
That was just it.
Yes. So the experience of women's experiences of early labour care is out of the scope of a normal birth guideline. Anyhow, so then the comment that I made.
I'm sorry, I can only laugh because otherwise I'm going to cry.
There was most of my suggestions got that response. I think they just cut and pasted it. But here's a slightly different response. This was about the duration. So I said the reference here is ACOG guidelines, not research evidence. Rates of cervical dilatation vary between individual women and are not a good indicator of future labour progress. Response to me. Yeah. Thank you for your feedback. In the absence of evidence, in quotes, contemporary practice / consensus is frequently all that guides practice. Right. So right there, we have an absolute admission that they are using consensus to guide practice, which is not really the highest.
Well, we've been doing it a long time. Seems to be working. We'll just carry on. That's all right. No one's worried about that, are they? Everyone loves a pair of fingers, gloved fingers stuck up there. Exactly. Who has?
So when we talk to midwives about guidelines, they need to understand that the guidelines they're working from, there may be some evidence in there, but they're primarily culture-based. And I love McCourt's quote about this, which is that despite claims of evidence-based practices are underpinned by an established hierarchy of understanding and practice rather than by research. So that's what we're working with. And that's why midwives struggle, because they're supposed to be working from guidelines that are mostly culture-based, and then they feel obligated to do these things. And there is an alternative. We know that, we had a whole episode with Claire about assessing labour progress in different ways, and we all do it. We can all assess where a woman is, looking at her behaviours. And anyway, does it matter where she is? If the baby's well, she's well, all's well. It really doesn't matter. This comes back to, again, institutional birth, where it has to be in time frame so we can get women in and out in the time frame that the institution is funded for. So, that's a lot of the underpinning rationale. So for midwives doing this thing, you need to share that with women. And to do a vaginal examination, you need to get consent. So if you're working somewhere, and I think I probably said this before, in an organization where vaginal examinations are expectation of your role because it's in the guidelines or the policy, etc., then you do need to tell women that, hopefully antenatally. But even if you're caring for a woman before you do a vaginal examination, you need to say to her that in this hospital, it is a recommendation that we offer a vaginal examination every 4 hours. And that word offer is so important, to say offer. And then you talk to her about the risks of a vaginal examination, that this is not evidence-based. It's not necessarily going to tell us where you are in labor, and it might make you, think about how you're going to feel if your cervix isn't as open as you think it is, even though you might have your baby in an hour's time. So, that it's not it's not going to give you any accuracy about when you're going to have your baby, that we're risking infection when we put our fingers in. We might accidentally break your waters. Most women find it uncomfortable, if not painful. You'll probably find that there's an increase in contractions, that in order to get a really good assessment, you're probably going to have to change position. trying to think off the top of my head if there's any more. So you're telling her the risks. And then you're also saying to her that it's not an accurate assessment, but that's the recommendation because that's just how it has been for many years. And there's lots of research showing that it's, doesn't really assess progress. And then you say to the woman, what would you like to do? And you also reassure her and say, I can see that there's been changes since you came here. You're moving differently. Your baby's moving down. The baby's happy. You're doing really well. Do you want to know what your cervix is doing?
Yep.
And then say, and I'll support you either way. Most women will say yes.
That's great.
But a lot of women
yes
will
to
say
the VE or yes to
a VE because they think that that's what's expected. And even when you say that this is not evidence-based, I don't mind either way, they'll still, because we're socialized to be good girls, all antenatal, if they're watching TV or they're engaging in mainstream antenatal education, it's all about the cervix. So they're going to want that number because, when you're in labor, you just do think, when the fuck is this going to end? And if you think that somebody putting their fingers in you and telling you a number is going to
tell you a time frame,
exactly, then you're going to say, do it.
Of course.
So most women will say it, but other women will say, well, do I have to? And you say, no. And then you document. And then, yes, as a midwife, it's actually your job to then document that and then protect and support her if there's any kickback from other people.
And I think also explaining the other signs of progress in labor. Like, we need to be doing this antenatally, ideally not during the labor, because it's pretty difficult to actually absorb that information. But we shouldn't, like you say,
PowerPoint out and
I love doing that. I'm known for it.
Now, just
I bring it in, my little
look up here
and the laser pointer. And if you'd like to direct your vision right down to your vulva right now.
Well, this is where people who are in antenatal education, who deliver antenatal education, can make a massive difference because once a woman's in there, it's too late, really. She's now in that limp. She needs to just disconnect her thinking brain and get on with it. Some thoughts around antenatal information, and those of us who are lucky enough to work in continuity of care can do this as well, is you need to talk to women about VEs if they are going to birth in a place where it's the norm. In fact, I would even talk to them as a private practice midwife where I don't routinely do them. I would still have that conversation and ask her thoughts about vaginal examinations in labor. What does she already know? What are her expectations? Does she have any particularly strong beliefs either way, to work out where she's at with that? And share the cultural norms of the place she's going to birth in, so that she's aware that the hospital she's birthing in or the birth center has this particular approach to vaginal examination, so she's not kept off, caught off guard. And share the evidence. So then talk to her about the research evidence. Talk to her about the physiology of birth and how the uterus transforms and how the cervix is pulled open, and why what the cervix is doing is not a great indicator of what the whole uterus is doing or when she's going to have her baby. Talk to her about the risks of VEs. Talk about the benefits. Some women like to have a number, and if it's a number that's positive, it can give women huge amounts of reassurance to go on, even though it's false reassurance.
How many times have we heard the story of, oh my God, I'm still 4 centimeters, and then in an hour's time,
baby.
She's giving all the signs of this baby's about to come. However, we've ignored it. VE's been done, assessed as 4 centimeters, but actually that's completely not what's happening. I mean, Claire talks beautifully about that in her episode.
Absolutely. And remind her about her legal rights, that she has to give consent to anything that's done to her and what consent means and how, what information she would need to get that, and reinforce your support again, that this is her body and it's actually her decision, nobody else's. And also, what I'm talking about here is primarily about physiological birth. And let's face it, most women don't have an unmedicalized physiological birth. And things change once you're not having that. So, a woman who's having an induction, then because we are doing a medical intervention, there is a much stronger rationale for then seeing what because you can't see what the fundus is doing, but seeing if the cervix is opening in response to the medication, because that's valuable information in that medical intervention, because it's a medical birth. It's not a physiological birth. We're actually making it happen. Likewise, if a woman has an epidural and she can't feel or sense all those other signs of progress, and we can't assess from the outside, and it doesn't hurt when you've got an epidural, she might want to have a vaginal examination to have that bit of information, knowing that, still fairly inaccurate, but it's another bit of information. So, and in some hospitals, they will say, you can't have an epidural unless you've had a vaginal examination.
Well, they can say it, but it's also really difficult to stand up to that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very,
and you shouldn't
and
have to be.
And you can't make somebody give you something. You can't make somebody give you an epidural. You can stop someone from doing it because you have to give consent to get it. But it's a really tricky spot to be in if somebody's saying you can't get into the pool if you haven't had a VE, or you can't have an epidural if you haven't had a VE. Like, it's really, what do you do? Just jump in the pool anyway. So it's putting women in this really abusive position of, you have to have this thing done to your body in order to get something that you want from us. So while it's all kind of wrong,
and it's taking them out of the space where they're meant to be in, like that completely, as you say, the liminal space is switched off. They're having to be switched on and being brought back into the kind of physical world to argue their rights, which is, so disruptive in terms of the processes of birth.
Yeah, which is why antenatal preparation is the best approach to this, and continuity of care. Because if you are going into a facility, for example, that insists on women having a VE before they can get into the birthing pool, right? If you share that with women antenatally, you can write birth plans around that. You can engage with the local facility and say, look, this is you as the midwife, because that's actually your job to advocate for the woman, and create a plan, a pathway, so that that's respected. And I have actually seen women go into hospital with birth plans that have been previously negotiated and discussed with hospital staff. And I don't want to say the word get away with, because it's not like that, but, have their wishes met that were right outside of the comfort zone of the facility, because they'd previously talked about it, had it documented, and owned it. So, that's a kind of bit of a tangent off. But you're right, antenatal information is really important for women, so they're not caught off guard trying to navigate VE policies while they're busy trying to give birth.
Yeah. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to do that antenatally, but that's the state of where we're at, unfortunately. I mean, to have to engage with the hospital on top of everything, it's huge. It's a lot of work and thinking and investigating for so many women. And you would hope that when you're pregnant, that you can rely on the information that's being given to you from the place where you're planning to give birth. But we know it's not quite like that yet.
No, and that's why a lot of women opt out of it. And that's also why we need to, what I call sharing the map, is it's not about saying, oh, the hospital's a really evil place and is going to try and do all these horrible things to you. It's talking to women about how the organizations operate, and that they're general in nature, that they have these guidelines that are about generalized care, that are aimed at care providers who have little experience and lots of experience. And that in order to map a pathway through that, you need to take ownership of it if that's what you're planning to do. And that, individuals in the organization either really don't give a shit what you do, as long as their back's covered. As long as they're not the one who's going to get cop it for you making decisions, which they're not. If you have had those conversations and documented it, then 9 times out of 10 it's supported.
Absolutely. And I think the way you spoke about it was brilliant. So what about for when you were working in private practice, so it wasn't common practice to do VEs, and then the woman says, can you do a vaginal examination?
Yeah, well, the great thing about working in private practice is you don't have to follow hospital policies. You don't even have to have these conversations if you don't want to. And, I would only do a vaginal examination or initiate one if I was concerned. And I would talk to the woman about what my concerns were and whether or not we could get more information by doing that. Or sometimes you don't. You just think, oh, this baby needs a bit of help in jiggling back out the pelvis to get back in again. You don't even do a vaginal examination to work that out, because you can tell. But I would only do it in response to, a concern, let's say. But a good percentage of women will ask for a VE at some point, even women who have made the decision to not birth in a hospital setting and, want a totally, undisturbed birth. Because it's so deeply entrenched in our culture that it's in that subconscious part of the brain. So when we're laboring and our clever thinking brain's tuned down, all of that subconscious stuff rises up. And when women get to that point where they're like, I can't do this anymore, particularly, around transition, where they're going, how much longer am I going to have to do this? They will often ask, like, how far along am I? Can you do a VE? Like, how many centimeters am I? And it can be really
I totally
tricky.
understand that. Yeah.
I mean, I will not.
Because it's like, oh my God, this feels like so intense now. I don't know if I can actually continue with this. This is like the peak. Like, I'm just hanging on here because you're at that point. And it's like, just someone tell me it's like the baby's about to just fall out. Like, I need to know. And then I can go, oh, great, I've got minutes. Whew. I can get it. Like, that makes sense. That's totally what would come up to be like, how much longer this? I'm at my limit. I'm not coping. I'm going to lose my shit. Just tell me. Even though you could go in, say 6 centimeters, and then like one contraction later, and there's a head-on show. But I get it. I get that kind of need of, like, I've been in it's different situations in life where you go, I just need to know. I just need to know is how much longer.
And even if you've had those conversations antenatally where you've said it doesn't tell you how much longer, that's just wiped aside. I won't say her name. She might recognize herself. I'll tell you a funny story. I looked after a woman for 2 of her home births, and at both of them, she knew that it was all bullshit. VEs weren't needed, but at each one that I cared for, she asked me to do a VE when she was kind of feeling overwhelmed and losing it and all that kind of stuff. And my response to her was my usual response, which is like, first of all, you're trying to work out is what does this woman want? Does she actually want me to do a VE and get a number, or is she just wanting reassurance? Will it be enough for me to just say you're doing really well and reassure her? So I think that's the kind of first approach, is to do the reassurance. Okay, so if that doesn't work, and it didn't with her, I then encourage her to do it herself, because I actually don't need to know what a cervix is doing. And some women will do this. They'll just put their fingers in and they'll go, oh, there's a head there, or oh my God, I can feel hair, or oh, I can't feel anything, and then just leave it. We'll move on from that moment. But this particular woman would do that and go, no, can you just do one? Basically, just fucking do your
Rachel,
job.
just put your gloves on and do it. All right?
Do a vaginal examination. So in those circumstances, I don't really need to get a really good estimate of the, if I was concerned about a baby, then you're going to do the whole, I want a full, find out what position the baby's in, all that stuff. You don't. So you can just put your fingers in whatever position the woman's in. You don't have to ask her to move, because you're really just doing it to give her some information. So I'll put my fingers in, and every time, they'd go, oh, yep, there's a bit of cervix there, and I can feel the baby's head. Don't know how many centimeters, because I'm not going to dig around, but your cervix is opening and the baby's there. Excellent. You're doing really well. And that would be enough.
I love the vagueness. That's perfect.
Well, because I actually couldn't, because it was on all fours in a pool, so I can't.
Yeah, you're like half upside down and in a really weird position, and
so we did that twice, and then she had a baby, and it was all good. And then with her last baby, I wasn't her midwife, so I was there as her friend, right, to birth support, and she had like 2 really great midwives, so I didn't have to get involved in that side of it. But she started to do the same thing again, because often women have patterns in labor. So I could see this happening. And she actually said to me, Rachel, do you want to put your fingers in for old time's sake? And I just said, nope, I'm not your midwife this time. You can't make me do that to you.
I love that. The role reversal. You can't make me do the VE.
And I think she actually birthed without it. I can't remember now, but I don't think the other midwives did it either, because I think it was we had a bit of a laugh, and then she had a baby. not long afterwards.
Yeah, the laughter was just enough to just get her over that next hurdle.
So basically what I'm
Brilliant.
saying is, yes, women will ask. And if you're a midwife, then you are with woman. And if the woman insists, then you're working for her. And she knows the risks and she wants you to do it, you do it and give her the information. But, you know, a lot of women don't, or they're quite happy with some reassurance, because often women will ask it at that point where they're just needing to be told that they're doing amazingly and their baby is coming. And that's enough.
Yep. Can I ask you a question about time? And is there a point where you're at home birth or you're with a physiological birth? So I'm talking strictly physiological birth, no interventions. Is there a point in time where you would go, I need to do a VE because of the time scale, like 24 hours, 36 hours, whatever it is? Is there ever a time when it's about time, if you see what I mean?
Yes, I do see what you mean. So it's not so much about time, it's about pattern, which I know is like not really a great answer. So, you know, for example, a woman who is having contractions every 5 minutes, every 7 minutes, I'm not expecting to see a baby anytime soon. She's probably going to have a very long labor because her labor pattern is really spaced out. If you're having very close together, strong, powerful contractions, I'm expecting to see a baby within 12 hours plus. So Friedman's curve is actually probably fairly accurate if a woman's having very strong contractions, because those contractions should be doing something if they're coming that quickly and that strong. So you are starting to, now my timing, and I know other home birth midwives use this one, is I don't like to see the sun go up or go down, depending on which one it is, twice.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean I would do anything about it, but if that's happening, then you're going, what's happening here? What's the pattern of the labor? Is the length of this labor explained because the pattern is happening? What position's the baby in? You know, is that contributing to this labor being a normally longer labor? But you're really looking at patterns. So, and even then you'll be looking at other factors and talking to the woman. Women are usually the ones, in fact, I'm trying to think of a time when a woman hasn't been the one who says that this is not all right. There's something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that
because when we don't interfere and mask it, they listen to their body, because they can't do anything but listen to their body.
And they're connected in. They are the first ones to say, this doesn't feel right, or is there something I can do because this is not working, or I feel like the baby's not moving, or things aren't happening. So it's more around that than the time frame. With women having VBACs is a little bit different, because obviously thinking about the uterine scar, which is their only additional risk, which is, you know, very, very small, particularly in physiological birth, we're talking about a lot less than 1%, like 0.2% or something. But what that tends to present with is a very unusual pattern of contractions. So you might be a bit more alert. But even then, you know, vaginal examination is not going to do anything in that scenario.
So, no, I was just going to say that, but then the vaginal examination doesn't actually give you anything. I mean, it can reassure you if you don't know about the evidence, in terms of it doesn't really mean anything. No. However, you're going to be looking at the other signs to say if you need to transfer in, or you're getting someone else more senior in the hospital to come and have a look to assess other things. Yeah,
and then they would do it. So you would transfer. If you're definitely transferring in, then there's no need for you to be doing that. But if it's, you know, if you're thinking, is this baby in a very strange position, like coming down brow or something else interesting, then that's what you'd be looking for, not how open the cervix was, but what position is the baby in. And, you know, I felt eyes feel very, very odd. The worst one that
I'm so sorry.
Gently, and you kind of feel this weird orbit, and you go, what is that? Oh, it's an eye orbit. The weirdest thing I've ever felt was I put my fingers in and a little hand grabbed my fingers. And that's what I did.
My God.
You know how you have to have that poker face when you're doing VEs, right?
Yes.
Well, my poker face went, and I actually went, ah! And then had to go, I'm really sorry. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. I just have somebody holding my hand right now.
That's like magical.
Yeah, it was a little hand. And she birthed vaginally, perfectly fine. It just had its little hand in front of its head for a bit of the labour.
So I'm mind blown now, because I'm like, wow, that's so incredible.
It's a bit freaky. Yeah, and sometimes, so incredible. I haven't done this, but, sometimes you might find a bottom.
I found a bottom.
You can find all kinds of strange things in there.
All kinds of strange things in there.
All kinds of feet, bottoms, hands.
I know someone who put their finger in and then the baby sucked on the finger. Have you had that? Has no one else? So I know a midwife who told me that, and that was like, what?
So that would be
crazy. And you're like, oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's clearly like, ooh.
Yeah. So there is a time when you might do one, and you might find interesting things when you're in there, but rarely.
But then you've had all the signs. It's not just time. That's been, like you say, pattern has made you go, I've got an inkling. The woman's got an inkling, but I can't work out what it is from everything else that's external. And then, of course, then you're like, oh, there's a little hand. It's going, hello. And that it might take a bit more time. That's what's going. There's a movement process happening there that's just taking a bit longer. It's just playing with the contractions.
Yeah. And again, it's not about assessing the progress of labour. It's about responding to a particular concern or pattern to see more what's happening inside there in terms of the position of the baby. So we'll go back to the olden days then, I guess, is we've done a nice circle in this podcast of that's how a lot of midwives are now practicing, is they've kind of, we're not doing the 4-hourly VEs because we're not in institutions that are making us do that. And we've gone back to that, doing it. It's a really important skill for midwives to have, but it's a skill you don't use very often.
Can I just ask about the assessment VE to be allowed, in quotes, to come into the hospital?
Yeah, well, that's bollocks, because it doesn't.
Great, that's it. That's all I know. But there's almost like this is the door policy. I'm the doorman. I'm the bouncer. Sorry, not with those trainers, mate. Go home, get changed, that's not even... come back when you're ready.
But that's not even in guidelines. Most of the time, that's not in the guidelines. That's the hospital trying to manage staffing and limit the number of people who are in there who want in. So it's not about the woman or about physiology or about how labour works. It's about protecting the institution from having wastes of time hanging about, not, being in labour, not being worth their money.
So how should we be handling that in terms of the ideal is to stay at home as long as possible when the woman is coping and has, no,
and I think
not being in hospital too long.
I think that's a whole podcast in itself, is how we manage early labour. Write
that down. We'll be back, listeners.
We'll be back
with that, because that's where I go, whoa, this is a tricky one. Yeah. We need to discuss that. Sorry, guys, not this podcast. It's the next one.
Put it on the list.
It's on the list. Okay, so then that leads me to so when we're talking about learning how to feel confident with VEs, because like you said right at the beginning, this can be one of those things that you go in and go, I remember my first comment to my partner at the time. I was like, I did my first VE. I was really excited, which just owning it and admitting it. I'm sorry. And he was like, how was it like? And I went, warm. It's my only comment. I was like, it's really warm. He was like, is that it? And I went, yeah, I didn't know what I was feeling. No idea. So like when you're a student, how the hell, like, how can we learn this skill but also reduce how many we do? Because you kind of feel like, I just need to put my fingers inside every woman that I'm with as often as possible so that I can practice. But you also now are listening to this podcast and going, but I shouldn't really be doing them.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Like, I guess if we went back to the old apprenticeship style, you would be working alongside a midwife, and when there was a complication and they were initiating a vaginal examination, you would be involved in that, and you would also do a vaginal examination and feel the brow and feel. So you probably then more be feeling pathology, but you'd also be feeling physiology. Yeah. But the way things are now, I can't fathom how student midwives don't get the opportunity to develop their vaginal examination skills. The epidural rate is huge in hospital settings. You know, the chance to look after a woman who has a really good working epidural, so then that takes some of the fear off you as the student that you're going to hurt them, it's going to be uncomfortable. And particularly when you're following through, women are really generous when they know that you're learning. You know, I mean, you could probably remember when we were student midwives, like women they'll let you practice taking blood from them. They'll let you do vaginal examinations.
Thank you to all those women.
Yeah, because they're generous and they understand that we need to learn. It's particularly when you've got a relationship with them in continuity care, they're very generous with midwifery students. And, it's about starting when the woman has an epidural, start there, because, you can fertile around without causing pain for a lot of women. And
fertile
about.
Sorry.
Probably the wrong.
Fertile about that word.
That's probably the wrong word.
Is it? It is definitely the wrong word to use when you're talking about doing a VE. Jeez, I don't need fertling about in my...
You have no bloody idea what you're doing. You're just fertling around and going, oh, it's warm.
It's warm. What am I meant to do?
So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that there is enough women having epidurals and inductions and epidurals who are generous to share their bodies for students to learn with consent, being asked first when the student's not in the room. So I would say to students, take all those opportunities, because that's how you're going to learn. Because there isn't apprenticeship. There isn't the opportunity to work for many years alongside an experienced midwife who's going to bring you into assessments, etc. And those bloody boxes that they have at uni. Do you see the VE box? Oh my God. So part of the problem is with
like a play box.
It's a box with a vulva, and you put your fingers in, and like you can change the cervix at the top that doesn't feel anything like a cervix. It's not warm. So that we need to stop that. Vaginal examinations are really intimate, they're really personal, and nothing feels like a vagina and a cervix. Yes. Nothing you can replicate. Yes. And to teach it kind of away from the woman, what's the word? Discombobulated, that's the wrong word.
Disconnected.
I'm fertling and discombobulated. I'm tired.
Brilliant. You've done bloody good, so.
To teach it as something that's distanced from it's really, vaginal examinations are really intimate, and they should be done with the woman, in conversation with the woman about, please tell me where to stop if it's uncomfortable. And it's all kinds of wrong to teach student midwives to stick their fingers in a box and guess what the bit of plastic is. Sorry. You're laughing at me.
Oh God. Is there any value in the go home and feel your own?
If you want to. I mean, it'll give you an idea of what a cervix feels like when it's not in labour.
Yeah.
Like a firm bit of nose.
Yes. Well, it's different. And I mean, the whole feel your nose, it's like the end of your nose. It doesn't really. You haven't got everything warm around your fingers and blah, blah, blah.
There's not bogies
also depends like the length of your hands, how flexible you are, where your cervix sitting. Don't worry if you can't find it.
It's there. You don't have to fertile about. But there is a real thing about, the real push for women to be fertling around in their bits so they can be empowered and not, but I think for some women that's great. That's what they need to do to feel empowered about their bodies, but you don't have to do that to feel empowered about, you don't have to feel your cervix and fertile about in your vagina to trust your body and know your body works. Is that a good place to end fertling?
Yep, let's fertile away into the rest of our lives now. And leave the podcast, leave the cauldron. It can fertile away. Does that make sense? Is it fertile while we're there?
I don't know. I have to go
I
and
don't
look
know.
that
Whatever
up now.
it's doing,
I
it's
might have
bubbling.
made that word up completely. I own it.
Brilliant. It's what do you call it? With a TM after it. Patented.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm stopping this before we get on to write a load of words that we don't even know what we're talking about. Brilliant. So we now have a task, Rachel, of recording a podcast about assessing early labour for the next one.
Yeah, or just about what we do to early women in early labour. All right, put that in the diary.
Yeah. Brilliant. Fabulous. Thank you for this. I'm really grateful that we have a podcast that I can now put vaginal examinations and it's seen. And if people don't want to look through our back catalogue, which personally is very silly not to, they can come straight here. So brilliant. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your fertiling with me today.
My pleasure.
I hope you found a few golden nuggety nuggets in the show today. Please don't press pause, but instead scroll on down on your podcast app. Yep, that's it, down there, and pop a review and maybe a few stars to make our eyes twinkle with glee. For more on breastfeeding and lactation content, head on over to my website where my course is. And for courses and books from Rachel, you can find everything in the links below. So all I gotta say now is, see you next time. And I can't wait. So here's the bloopers. I found a bottom. And I've found a cheek once. Like cheek.
Wow.
Or was it? Wait, I'm going to cut this because I'm now thinking maybe it was just bum.
A bum cheek.
It was a bum cheek.
You can find all kinds of strange things in